Boseiju who endures is a must-play in green decks, but why is this tree such a landmark? It's a large tree and it's impressive that it still stands with those long, thin roots. It must be a strong tree, but why is it strong? First, a little history lesson. Kamigawa is a world where spirits influence every part of life. This was not always so mundane for the people of Kamigawa. Approximately 1300 years ago, Kamigawa did not have any kami roaming around. Only when an ancient emperor stole the essence of the guardian of the barrier between the spirit and the physical world, did the kami enter the physical world. The kami that entered the physical were peaceful at first. The problem was an essential one that could never have been prevented. The spirit world is a perfect reflection of the physical world. While the spirit world is massively different, the kami all belong to their mirror entities in the physical world, so they would be drawn to their physical manifestations. This would tether them to the physical world more firmly, not because they are those objects, but because they are the thoughts about those objects. The kami of a calm lake would be a calm kami. The kami of an ancient battlefield, on the other hand, that kami would incite anger in the humans around it. The kami of the last piece of crescent moon would be a smiling manifestation of everything that comes before the end. Throughout this video, keep this flavor text from a snake shooting magic arrows from a tree in mind. Bamboo Grove Arches card says, "Do not mistake tranquility for domestication. This land is wild and will always remain so." Let's unpack that flavor. Do not mistake tranquility for domestication. A tree or a snake can seem tranquil, yet the forest will always be wild, and this land will always remain so. Even when people build through the forest, the land will remain wild at its heart, through its kami, through its inhabitants, and because of historians. Also note how the Bamboo Grove Archers' arrows are bamboo shaped. Note as well how long their tail is. That's probably how he moves through the trees, by using his long, slithering tail. The Orochi snake people have become more tranquil and have started working as historians, as we see here. What they remember though is not just stories. It actually remembers strength. When this enchantment enters the battlefield, you draw a card. It celebrates strength at this moment, as the historian knows that strength is what made his ancestors flourish. It even keeps Boseiju alive, holding on through strength, perseverance and very long roots, which are also an analogy towards history. Orochi weren't always peaceful. More on that later. Boseiju was not always a city tree. It used to be the largest tree in Jukai Forest. Jukai is the largest forest on Kamigawa. Its green mana manifests through kami that believes strength is the greatest virtue of all. But even the millennia-old forest of Jukai was once born. The Grandmaster Dosan once told of a story about this creation. Grandmaster Dosan, who lived next to Boseiju and who was master to Master Seishiro, told us that once there was a kami called Iname. Before Kamigawa existed, Iname did not have any purpose, as all kami do now. So Iname looked for one. He tried to learn from his brother Chaos, but did not like his work. He did the same with his sister Light and then his brother Knowledge. But then Iname thought to himself that he could create his own purpose, and he created life. This life was the firstborn kami. As many children do, the kami of life asked his creator a question. Iname was only a few million years old, so he did not have the answers. He said that they would travel the universe for an answer. The child impulsively created flowers here and became the first flower kami. The two would keep exploring the universe, and every time the child saw something new, he would be inspired to create life from the same idea, the same concept. Iname had finally found a purpose for himself. He was the father of the kami of life. When life asked Iname what its purpose was, Iname had the answer. In his eyes, the kami of life's purpose was to be his own son. That would be enough. The child was dissatisfied and Iname noticed this. Iname's fears became the first withering thought. The first flower would welk and die. For every time Iname tried to control his child, more death followed. At this moment the roses gained thorns. Iname searched for the child, withering worlds in his wake. When he finally found him, the child answered that it was time for Iname to leave him alone. Iname was enraged, he was his father, life was his, but life would not listen. So Iname, fueled with rage, killed Life, his own son. Out of Iname himself grew a second body. Attached at the waist was the kami of death. Iname would struggle to continue his son's work, to create life, but he couldn't create new life. He could only recreate what his son once created. Death would inevitably come and rip it all apart again. We learn about the creation of kamigawa, but we also learn about kami. They can be stopped, but will continue, and they can be killed, but will be reborn in some way. And now they can never change again. Their function will never disappear. Kamigawa though has changed, as all planes do. Just as we hope we can relive these old sets, Kamigawa tries to say the same. So in Neon Kamigawa, many cards revolve around the history of Kamigawa, and because of this meta interaction, historians are very important on the Neon field world. We see this importance of history in cards like Storyweave. The card strengthens a creature. Again, Green's history is all about strength. Then the second option lets you move through a story, a saga. Sagas from Neon Kamigawa tell a story from Kamigawa's past. This one, again, strengthens your creatures a bit on the first 2 turns. Putting 2 lore counters on it makes the saga go to chapter 3 at once. So you put down a second counter on another creature for chapter 2, then you exile the saga and get a 5/5 when Tails flips. This 5/5 also has vigilance and haste and then gets 2+1 counters from Storyweave. The flavor tells us more about Master Seishiro, student to Master Dosan. In times of strife, the foolish make a fist, while the wise make a friend. This was the first speech of Master Seishiro when he became Broodmaster of the Orochi colonies. Interesting. In light of our previous Snake Man, I feel like we should learn more about Master Seishiro. Seishiro is the perfect manifestation of Jukai Forest. The Orochi child trained with the human monks in a temple next to Boseiju tree. Here he learned to chant and he learned to use a bow and an arrow. Throughout his training he preferred meditation. When the temple was attacked by the Kami of Decay, Seishiro knew that it was time for action. When Decay was so close to the heart of the forest, something had to be done, so he went back to the Orochi people and quickly became their master. A perfect balance between silence and strength made Seishiro the perfect leader for the Snake people, and the Snake people tried to follow his example. Not all people follow their historic lessons. Shigeki is a snake druid who has a channel ability. This is something that's mostly remembered from the land cycle, as Boseiju for example has a channel ability which makes it almost always strictly better than a forest land. Shigeki's ability costs 2 green and 2 X. Then you can discard him to return X target non-legendary cards from the graveyard to your hand. So you can't get Shigeki's back and you can't get other historical figures back. But Shigeki protects the other living creatures of Jukai. Being a visionary, Jukai is almost the opposite of an historian. Yet he returns the creatures of the forest slowly. You can also return Shigeki to your hand and put cards into your grave and the land into your hand. This shows his resourcefulness. Shigeki once went into a forest and met a kami who showed Shigeki that the world would end if civilization would cross too many more boundaries. So Shigeki took it upon himself to found a group of people to counteract the push of human civilization. We see him returning creatures and spirits and lands of the forest. His first ability now tells us that him finding lands is on purpose too. Finding lands shows us that Shigeki does not mind milling 4 cards if it means expanding the forest's reach. He actually lets his order do anything. like for example poison people who have polluted the lands. It shows us that the forest of Jukai has indeed renounced society, even to the point of banishing all humans from the forest. Only a few people, among whom Kaido's sister Aiko Shizuki, are allowed access for short times to communicate with the spirits. The Order of Jukai still values strength, only accepting the strongest of body and spirit into their ranks. This is a different strength than that of the classical Boseiju, but it is also green. I think it's great that these two philosophies live side by side now, having learned from history but also taking the pieces of it that they can use best right now. Who is the Kami of Boseiju? Boseiju is the tallest tree of Jukai. Boseiju means sacred mother tree, and that name was given because the Kami of this tree was the first tree Kami to directly influence this world. The tree is over 3,200 years old now, so when the Kami War began, this tree was already 2,000 years old. You can imagine how old the Kami of this tree is now. Usually, Kamis gain most power from present thoughts, but when you've gathered the emotions of 32 generations of people and many other creatures, you start to change into a less vivid and way stronger manifestation of primal power. This is what you feel when you're near the Boseiju tree, an ancient feeling of strength from many generations, and you can only respect it and the memories that come with it. Here we see why Boseiju wants to keep influence over the city itself. It can influence the people itself, it can make them stronger, it can unleash their own strength, because it is in the humans as well, this strength. It is also in their hearts. We see this in the flavor. She closed her eyes and remembered the smell of the leaves of Jukai Forest. This is probably how it feels when the Kami of Boseiju enters your mind. You can probably smell and remember the smell of its leaves. When she opened her eyes, the building of Tawashi had grown small. She's grown taller than the buildings of Tawashi. She's gotten the strength to make a change, all because Boseiju endures. Let's look at another signature card of the tree. This saga is about a tree that reaches into the sky. Not only does it leave the ground, it also carries its massive weight on its long roots. It must be carried by something else. The card lets you search for a forest, then you put a land from the grave on your library. This is a flavor win, as you could return a channeled Boseiju, which means you sacrifice it to destroy an artifact made by man, and then you get to return Boseiju who endures. Then at chapter 3, perhaps Boseiju is back in your grave and you get another branch of Boseiju, which might be enough to resurrect the tree once more, flavorfully. This branch is a creature that gets +1 for every land under your control. It becomes stronger with every bit of forest, basically. The flavor says, though they razed the surrounding forest, the builders of Tawashi left Boseiju unscathed. Perhaps they were inspired by the Kami of Boseiju as well, shaping the city around the ancient tree. By doing this, they made Boseiju part of the city, enabling it to enact influence over it as if the city is the forest. In many ways that is true, because Boseiju's roots might be under every building on Kamigawa. But this is not the end of the story. The people of the large city of Tawashi finally came together after the Kami War. They'd come together to bring peace and balance to this world. Goblins, humans and moonfolk came together and started building one large city. When they started chopping down trees too far into Jukai territory though, the Kami of the forest fought back and invaded the city. The city surrendered quickly, not wanting another Kami War, and struck a deal. They would not continue their expansion. The people had never touched Boseiju. Whenever they came near it, they would feel the old Kami's presence, and out of respect, they'd leave it alone. They did, however, build huge skyscrapers around it. At this point, the tree started growing once more, leaving the earth with long roots and reaching into the sky to catch some sun. Now Boseiju keeps influencing the people that come around it, giving them strength, granting them the tranquility of the forest, even in the city, and slowly its roots strengthen and its influence over the city expands, patiently waiting to reclaim the soil of Jukai Forest. Let's end with 2 more cards. This big dog is not a panda. It is welcomed by the Jukai. The kami permit few mortals to dwell in Jukai forest, but the clever playful tanuki are welcomed as friends and guardians. Of course, dogs are man's friends and we can appreciate the spirits more now that they allow dogs to be in their home as their friends. Still, this tanuki tells a more poetic story. The humans were forced out of the story. That of a creature larger than man, stronger than one, that gets to stay around the spirits. It is strong enough to destroy a tree, but it chooses not to, and gets to play with its spirit friends. Also take a closer look at these small green spirits hidden in the shadows of this clearing in the forest. They return in many other cards. We saw the same colored spirits with Shigeki, staying around him and trusting the snake. And we saw them in Story Weave. The wisps of story are much like the kami of the forest. This might mean that many of the stories from Kamigawa, much of the history even, might be coming straight from the machinations of the kami here. Whether the stories and histories are true is somewhat unknown, and perhaps they alter the stories as kami are proud to do, so that they can change Kamigawa towards one day growing the forest again. Because one day, it will. Pavement ripped like paper as the ancient kami awoke from her long slumber beneath the city. One day, the city will be ripped apart, like the paper of a book from which a story springs. It will be ripped and the kami will be returned and will once again grow the forest anew. The forest will endure. Even the city brings new kami that might also endure and that might change the world of Kamigawa. The forest will stay around, or at least try to, and the fight is definitely not at its last stages.